Surprise!
We're taking the EdUp Experience podcast to Insights EDU. Join us for an incredible higher education marketing and enrollment management conference, February 20th to 22nd in Phoenix, Arizona. Register now at insightsedu.com and use promo code EdUp to save $50 off your registration. Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education, is
Amazing!
Thousands of copies have been sold across the United States and the world. You can pick up your copy today on Amazon. Welcome back, everybody. It's your time to EdUp on the EdUp Experience podcast, where we make education your business. Yes, I say that every single time. Yes, I mean that every single time. But we prove it every single time. And as of yesterday, it's going to be a couple of weeks by the time you listen to this episode. But we just released our 700th episode. Yes, you heard that right. 700 episodes of the EdUp Experience that we have recorded and produced and released in a 3.5-year period. And with that, on the same day that we released that 700th episode, we passed a total of 325,000 listens of our podcast episodes all across the world, getting close to that 20% a global audience listenership, right? So about 84% of our listeners come from the United States, and about 16, 17, 18%, depending on the day, are our world, our partners across the world. We are humbled. We are overjoyed that we continue to bring you the most incredible, amazing, insightful conversations across higher education at scale. Nobody can do it quite like we do it. Why do I know that? Because Elvin, as I have said before, edits in his bathroom, and I record every single day at lunch while I eat a salami sandwich. Nobody else even wants to do those things, so we're just going to keep doing them ourselves. But what we are going to do is keep bringing you amazing co-hosts and guests. And along with our new co-hosting theme, I've brought a past guest, now co-host. Right? It's like the Triple Crown. You gotta host your own episode of EdUp without me, where I'm sick one day and somebody takes over. You have to co-host and you have to be a guest, and then we're gonna have like a Triple Crown mug that we send out to people if they do all those things. Ladies and gentlemen, here she is. She's back again. Nicole Engelbert. She is the VP of Higher Education Product Strategy at Oracle. Nicole, what's up? How are you?
Joe, it's great. It's great to be back. I had so much fun the first time. I thought I would, go for a repeat, and maybe someday we could make it a three-peat on the EdUp. But, Melanie's kind of a draw. So I was very keen to be part of this.
You know what I love about what you just did? And if anybody has listened to these episodes before, my rookie co-host, which you're a rookie, this is your first time co-hosting with me. You gave away the name of the guest before I introed her. It's okay. It's okay.
Surprise! Surprise!
But you only got the first name, so you don't know who we have with us. But I'm going to bring her in now so she can be part of this absolute nonsense that's already happening. Ladies and gentlemen, here she comes. She's running to the microphone right now. Melanie Gottlieb, she's the Executive Director of the American Association of Collegiate Registrars and Admissions Officers, better known as ACCRAO. Melanie, I got it all in before the applause stopped. How are you?
I am very well today. Thank you. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Oh, we're so excited to have you here. There's so much to talk about and what's going on in and around higher education. But if you've been living under a rock and you don't know what ACCRAO is, why don't you just start as if you were explaining it to somebody hearing about ACCRAO for the first time? What is it that you do and how do you do it?
Absolutely. So ACCRAO is a higher education association that works with more than 2,600 member institutions. Technically, institutions are our members, but at those institutions, we have individuals who are engaged with us. The practitioners who work with ACCRAO are academic records, transfer, international transfer, admissions, both graduate and undergraduate, admissions operations, and enrollment managers. And so we cover that whole array. Our members help students enter higher education and help ensure that they stay on track towards earning a quality credential at the end of their time in higher ed.
Amazing.
This is like what I'm all about, right? I started off in for-profit education, and I was an admissions rep. I started out at, barely minimum wage back in the early 2000s when I was working in for-profit ed as an admissions person, made my way up. Now at Lindenwood University, and oversee really the entire student life cycle. I want to talk about the role of the registrar. That's where I'd like to start. I mean, what a really interesting role. Super hard, by the way, like super hard job as a registrar. So much information coming at you at higher ed. An undervalued role, and it's interesting because everything seems to run through the registrar, but it's not necessarily a leadership position in a lot of universities. It's a processing job, or it's under this person or under that person. It maybe doesn't get the stature that it might need as we move forward to what the future of higher education looks like. What are the memberships? What's the membership saying? What are your thoughts around the role of the registrar and its role in the future of higher education?
I am pleased to hear you say this, because I think very few folks recognize what a critical linchpin role the registrar is and could be. The registrar really has their finger on the pulse of what's happening at the institution, and a well-deployed registrar really understands the data of the institution, can identify where the challenges are for students and for faculty. The registrar is often the intermediary between the administrative arm and the academic arm, and they can help smooth the path for program-related issues for faculty. They can smooth the path for learners in sort of course scheduling and in registration kinds of issues. And they really have a great handle on the technology that drives the institution. And so registrars are really power players at the institution. Some institutions understand that and really deploy their registrars well and support them in that way. And others, I think, we definitely need to help them see where they might be better utilizing that force in their office.
That's a fact. That's a fact.
I love the way you're talking about it, because if you think about the information, like I said, there's kind of two places where all the information flows, and it's the registrar and it's financial aid, right? And they're tied so closely together. And as you elevate your registrar and you start to think about the credit transfer evaluations and, are we accepting this or not accepting that? And that registrar strategically can play an important role on how the institution moves forward. And I think that it's an interesting position in that when most people think about it, it's like, oh, you're going to hire a registrar and they're just going to be processing all this paperwork all day long. It's like they're just going to be processing paperwork and entering and processing, and it's like complete opposite of that. It's strategy. It's how do we do these things? What technology do we need? Is technology elevating the role that the registrar is going to be able to play, or is it making it harder for a registrar to be involved in strategies? AI and all those things disrupting the job or making it even more important?
I think actually the technology is just an enabler. I don't think that the technology is really what is elevating the role. I think what elevates the role is the vantage point. The registrar has the vantage point of the institution and can see all of the systems, where they work and where they don't work. And a registrar is and can be a more, I would say, sort of systems thinker and a political thinker. They present the facts, and they can present those facts in ways that will help illuminate to the institution where the opportunities lie to improve things for their students. Where AI interfaces is, I think, that inevitably AI is going to come in and continue to do some of the more clerical operations, but you're always going to need that systems and strategic thinker in order to elevate the institution and do the thinking part. There's lots of things you can automate with AI, but you can't automate that sort of critical thinking, problem solving work that the registrar and sort of the higher level staff in their office needs to do.
Nailed it.
Now, Nicole, it's your turn to come in, but I need to set you up appropriately, and for Melanie to realize that the amazing questions you're going to ask. So Nicole's going to ask you a question or a series of questions, Melanie.
Prepare to be astonished.
Okay, now you can go, Nicole. No pressure.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you, Joe.
You're
That's
welcome.
like setting the bar kind of up at the top. So, Melanie, of course, registrars are my people because I build student systems, and registrars are the main user of student systems and of the millions of lines of code in a student system like Campus Solutions or Banner or Gensor or whatever you happen to be using. Student records is the most difficult part for a team like mine to build because of the complexity kind of it. When I now sit down with my strategy council, whose members I am absolutely certain you know because they're university registrars, they're anxious in a way I haven't seen before, because they are at the intersection of the disruption that's happening in higher education today about what is higher education.
Yikes!
What is the mission of higher education? What is the unit of measurement in higher education? Because the registrar has to manage it. If it's no longer a credit hour, what if it's a competency? What if it's, just a series of programs? Kind of what if it's a series of experiences? Scott O over at Wisconsin talks about it as, the tapestry of learning that you might have kind of over your, I do too, I absolutely do. And I told him I would credit him at some point in time kind of on that. So Scott, I got the tapestry kind of learning. I mean, Melanie, how are registrars dealing now kind of with being in that intersection of the profound disruption facing higher education and helping their institutions chart a path forward?
Yeah, wow. Okay. So first off, shout out to Scotty O. He is definitely at the forefront of sort of those registrars who see that, who see the change. I think that there is a pretty large cohort of institutions and registrars who aren't there yet. But Scotty O is doing that sort of critical thinking, and he's one of our thought partners. So I think that you are correct that we are at this like transition point, right? And I feel like higher ed is on the verge of transformation, and that transformation is going to be happening in the registrar's office. And I think if an institution can deploy the skills that the registrar has in their portfolio, those institutions who do that are going to be able to weather that transformation a lot more smoothly. Because really what we have to think about, and this is the way ACCRAO's positioning a lot of our work, is we have to think about the mobility of learning now.
Don't like it.
Right? So the registrar has always traditionally sort of kept the institutional record, and there are sets of protocols and processes that protect that integrity. And so the registrar has that skill, and they know what the guardrails are. Right. But by being really clear about the guardrails, there's a lot of creativity that you can deploy a same set of principles as we move forward and consider other forms of learning. That stuff has always been in existence. It's just that higher ed has not always thought about it, often discounted it, or used really kind of Baroque administrative processes to translate it into the currency of the realm, which is the credit hour, right? And that pressure to think about those has increased to a place where I don't think higher ed can ignore it any longer. and the practices that we use have to evolve.
Yeah.
So do I think the credit hour is going to go away? No, probably not. It's the building block of the institutional budget. I don't know how we would make the credit hour go away, but it can evolve. And I think that in addition to the credit hour, it's going to become increasingly important for institutions and the faculty to be thinking about what are the skills and competencies that they are sharing with the learner when they're in their classes, when they're taking those courses, when they're completing degrees. What are the skills and competencies, and how do they directly relate to real world life outcomes? How do they relate to the jobs that a learner is going to get? And how do we better equip those learners with the ability to articulate that? Because we haven't done a great job in higher ed of equipping the learner to describe what it is they learned, right? They get a transcript, which is lists of courses and grades, but it doesn't really tell you what they learned. And it's a rare student who can just do that. And I don't think that outside of higher education that employers really understand what a transcript is. They don't, I mean, it's a document, but the richness of what that student's experience is not conveyed there. And we have some real opportunities to make some changes. And I think if we do that, it then starts to allow us to think more creatively about the other ways that learning is happening and can begin to incorporate and recognize those in a degree pathway. And so we're at this place where I honestly think, while yes, it's a little scary, I think it's also incredibly exciting, because I think if we can find ways to really open our thinking around this, we create possibilities for lots more learners to engage with us, and in ways that they will find valuable, and in ways that might both transform who our community is and also, perhaps solve some of the enrollment crises that are happening.
Absolutely.
Bullseye.
But it's not, really, I don't think it's incompatible with really traditional models, because much of what you spoke about, kind of this learning kind of beyond the classroom, that quickly becomes a conversation about kind of the liberal arts experience. And that's such a wonderful scenario where we can have kind of fresh new ideas and ways that bring in folks who historically were not included in higher education, without losing the richness of our history in the American higher education kind of system. And there are a few times you can have, your cake and eat it too, which I think is really, really fantastic. So really well said. Absolutely.
Do you think that I want to build on that? Do you think that it's the history of higher ed that has us in trouble in some way? Melanie, that because it always comes to this, what's the relevancy of the liberal arts? Are we really equipping students with relevance, workplace skills that an employer has trouble understanding those if they're not contained in it? They have trouble understanding them if they're contained in a degree, and just as much trouble understanding them if the student's stacking a bunch of skills and whether those skills are validated and how they're packaged. And so there is a lot of confusion out there. Is it our historical place that was it our where we changed adverse for too long, then we just kind of ended up with this public trust decline? Or is it tuition? Is it the cost?
I think it's all of those things, to be quite honest. I think if the cost were not so high, we would not be having quite the same ROI crisis conversations that we're having. And I think the costs have run out of control, to be quite honest. And there's a problem there that I don't think ACCRAO is going to solve, but I think the higher ed community has to solve, and that's going to take a lot of work from multiple areas to do that. But I think where we can start to solve that issue is by going back to why are we here and what are we doing? Higher ed was not, if you think about history, higher education in the US was not for everybody. Like that's not the way it started. It started to educate the clergy. It was a very elite, very tracked kind of thing. And when it opened up around the time of the GI Bill, it suddenly became, over the course of the next couple of decades, the path to a middle class, which is great. But I think the cost balance has shifted. And so that's part of the problem the part of the reason we're a little bit in crisis. And the other piece is, I think that we have allowed the public narrative to get away from us. I think we have been a little more isolated than we ought to be. Some institutions really engage with their local communities and local industries. And those that do that, I think, have a better sense of how they can serve their local communities. But I think every institution is going to have to do a closer look at what are the programs that our community needs. How do we serve those needs? And they might have to make some hard decisions about some things that they might have to let go of. But I don't think that the idea of needing to connect to employment outcomes discounts the liberal arts. I'm a product of the liberal arts education. I am certainly well employed. Those skills need to be better articulated to the learners, and those skills need to be better articulated to employers so that everyone will understand that foundation of liberal arts, what it really gives. We talk about, it gives you critical thinking skills. Well, that's great, but let's talk about, let's connect that more deeply. What kinds of critical thinking, what kinds of problem solving, and how do those apply to the needs that employers are looking for right now? And how do we better connect that? I think that engagement that I think is missing in a lot of places is going to be the key.
Attention.
Are you ready to elevate your institution's marketing and enrollment strategies? Join the EdUp Experience podcast at the Insights EDU conference, February 20th to 22nd in Phoenix, Arizona. Don't miss out on this opportunity to hear from engaging speakers from industry-leading companies like Google, LinkedIn, Adobe, and higher ed leaders. Learn the latest marketing and enrollment strategies to grow your programs. Register now at insightsedu.com and use promo code EdUp to save $50 off your registration.
Attention. Oh, yeah.
Join the movement to mobilize and revolutionize higher education by picking up your copy of Commencement, the Beginning of a New Era in Higher Education today. This book has been featured in Forbes, NPR, Harvard Business Review, CEO World Magazine, NBC News, CBS News, and Business Insider, among many others. Don't miss out on what today's highest college leaders have to say about the future of higher education. Pick up your copy on Amazon. You know, when you said that the narrative of higher ed got away from us a little bit, I couldn't agree more. And I think it shows itself today too, where if you see somebody write or post on LinkedIn a positive article or post about higher education, they get immediately eviscerated, immediately. If you see somebody post a negative article or post about higher education, it gets shared. It gets shared immediately, or you have people come on that post and go, oh yeah, higher ed's, this, or higher ed's that. And you take that, and days and weeks and years go by, and all of a sudden, it's almost like certain members of the higher ed community became complicit in arguing for the value. And if you're not going to market the value, then the public is going to infer its value. That's what sales is, and sales doesn't go away no matter what industry you're in. You always got to sell your product, right? Do you think that we as an institution haven't, fought back against that narrative in an appropriate way? What do you hear from the membership? Is it something that are people coalescing around that? Or are we just waiting to see what happens?
I don't know that anyone's just waiting to see what happens. I think people are, I think individual institutions, to be quite honest, are working to figure out their own sort of set of challenges. And I think it's harder to find the coalescing. I think that that's where some of us at the association level are doing big thinking, is that we need to do two things. We need to help our institutions find and implement actionable solutions that are going to solve some of the challenges that they have, so that they can do their work better and support their learners better. At the same time, there is some power of those of us at the association level to come together and agree on sets of principles that we think we could articulate well for the general public. And I think that you will see more of that in the future. We do have those conversations, and I think that there's space to help institutions get there. But it's not going to be easy, because the one thing we haven't solved is the cost. And the cost is continues to rise. I mean, when I think about where it was when I went to school, and it was not inexpensive then, and where it is now, I don't know how we stop that. I don't know how we kind of stop that roller coaster. And we need some big solutions, I think, nationally, to help with that. While higher ed can rethink the programs, retool the offerings, and better articulate its value at the same time. These things have to happen together.
It's tough because, and I'm going to ask one more question, Nicole, then you can take the whole rest of the episode if you want. But it's like, Pepsi, Coke, and Mountain, that Pepsi and Coke, and they raise their prices, one raises, and even think about airlines, there's only so many. And so if one, Southwest always used to control the prices, they would say control the airline prices, because Southwest would lower their costs and it would pull the cost down of the other airlines. But there's 3,800 Title IV degree granting institutions. So it's very hard to take any trend, because there's so many different segments of the business, right? But I do want to transition and ask you something about admissions officers, because this is another part this never has made sense to me. And so somebody help me figure it out. You, Melanie, you've helped me figure it out. If we didn't sell higher ed, if we didn't sell to a student, if a student was a consumer, and if you wanted to, or anybody could disagree with me that a student is a consumer, but just let's say, for hypothetically, that the student is buying their education, and we sold widgets instead, or anything else. Typically, your people at the front who sell your product are much more highly compensated than many others throughout the organization, because they're the ones selling the product and generating the revenue. In higher education, if you look at any other business that sells a product, higher education is almost the complete opposite of it. And that you have your people who actually sell the product, bring a student in. Now, let's forget faculty for a second here. But the person who sells the product being on the much lower end of that pay scale, and being in a much greater, higher turnover situation. So if you're trying to generate revenue, you're tasked with doing two things: having a full staff, and having a full staff that's effective, that doesn't leave. And admissions in general, for all of my years at admissions, is the complete opposite of that. It's very low paid and very high turnover. What's the deal? Why are we built that way? Or am I wrong?
I would say you're not wrong, but I don't think you're
right either,
100% right either. Yeah, I wouldn't say you're right either. First, I don't think that, I definitely agree that the student, the learner, is a consumer. They absolutely are. The learner or the parent, at the undergraduate level, when you're working on sort of that first time freshman, you're looking at the student and the parent. They're the consumers. I think you're selling more than a product. I think you're selling an experience, which is in some ways perhaps part of our challenge, is that we're selling an experience. And the I think there is a generally accepted principle that you want your admissions people, who, to use your analogy, are your salespeople, to be closer to that experience and more relatable to those parents. And so I think that in theory, that is why we are kind of built that way, per se. I think in some ways, though, it's a little bit flawed thinking to really think about admissions people as salespeople. Because I would tell you that there are very few, while they have to have sales skills, they do the work not because they have a passion for selling. They do the work because they have a passion for the experience, and they have a belief that the power of education to change lives. And so they're really working to help counsel a student into making the right choice. And so I think they have a dual role. Yes, they are in many aspects sales, and perhaps that's your for-profit background peeking through, because I think that there are some lessons that can be learned from higher education, in sort of nonprofit higher education, from the for-profit sector, who approaches sort of that piece of it a little bit more like a business. And there are some great things that we can learn from that in terms of employing better sales skills and preparing people to do that work. But at the same time, it is counseling, because anyone who's really passionate about education knows that what you're trying to do is find the right match, because every institution is not going to be for every student. And it's in many ways, and I'm going to, as a parent, I'm going to step in and say, I told my children that it's less about the institution that you go to, because there are, 3,800 institutions in the country where you're going to get a great education. It's more about what you do when you're there. And so there's a problem in the way that we approach it. I think you're thinking about sort of the competitive versus the non-competitive admission cycles. And I think that that's the place where the narrative has gotten away from us. I think that we focus too much on this sort of, I've got to go to a particular institution because that's where I'm going to get the best chance of success in my life. And it should be a focus on, I need to figure out what I want to do with my life, and I need to go to the institution that is the best choice for me in both fit and finance. And then I can chart my path into my future. And that's not the public narrative, but it ought to be.
I like what you said. And in fact, I agree with every single thing that you said. I just think I couch it differently and with different terms, because you think about what you said and you have somebody that's just amazing at doing everything that you said, that enrolls hundreds more students. Now, of course, there's incentive compensation regulations of the federal government. But if you think about what starting salaries might look like for somebody who is very good at that job, you just wonder, are we built for growth in certain areas? That's all I get at, is if you think of it, are you building for growth? Is it a lower type position, versus another industry where you might have people that do the exact same thing that you're saying, that are just looked at in a different way in higher ed? We look at things over years and years and years the same way. You know what? But that was a great answer, and I agree. Nicole, over to you.
Though, Joe, I will kind of weigh in a little bit here in that. So I work at a firm that has a real sales organization.
Mm-hmm.
Oracle definitely has a sales organization. And having been someone who worked at admissions at a liberal arts college, there is very little in common with what I did at Union College versus what an Oracle account rep does in terms of their approach and thinking and how they're KPI. It's a very different type of thing. But that all being said, and this is where, Melanie, I promise I'll get to an actual question kind of for you, is that, I mean, what are your thoughts about admissions officers as individuals can have kind of short-term impact on an institution's enrollment health? But in terms of kind of a sustained kind of thrive or survive, or the other alternative, kind of how much is that kind of more about the institution's strategy, the institution's product, the institution's experience? I mean, there are many institutions that they could have no admissions whatsoever, and they would still be amazing because their school is amazing, whether they're open enrollment or kind of highly selective. But we don't necessarily support institutions, or institutions don't support themselves in decisions about making choices about who they are as an institution, what programs they offer. I mean, we can think about like a very specific institution right now who's cutting programs, and it is a firestorm.
Yikes!
They're trying to do the right thing for the institution in terms of the quality of its product. I mean, do you think that's fair, that we could build a regression model that predicts institutional health that's more weighted actually on the quality of the product than the strength of the admissions or enrollment management strategy?
So I would say yes, but
Okay.
so strength of admissions, yes, because I think we often, in institutions, this happens, institutions often think in short term, right? Let's talk about the fall numbers. And admissions directors' careers are riding on the bringing in of the fall class, which is generally about the fall freshman class, which, by the way, is shrinking. And so we're trying to compete for the same body of students, and there are less of them.
This is lunacy.
It is lunacy. But that is it's also short-term thinking. I think where the solution really lies is in the strategy and planning, and that's strategic enrollment management. So that is a section of ACCRAO practice that thinks about enrollment management as a holistic, whole institution activity. This is the way that ACRO does enrollment management that is different from other folks that talk about it. We have competitors in the enrollment management space, and often they focus on recruitment and marketing, which is great. That needs to happen. That sort of sales piece is important, and that needs to happen. But actually, where the institution is going to be both successful and find themselves sustainable is if they think about enrollment holistically, and they do an environmental scan, and they understand the needs of their communities, and they understand the realistic projections of enrollment. You know what? I don't know very many enrollment managers who have not been given the mandate from their institutions to grow. And we are just not in an environment where everybody's not going to grow. That is just not possible. The bodies aren't there. And so a smart institution is going to take a step back and figure out, what's our core mission? Who do we serve? What are we doing that is no longer serving and sustainable? And those are hard conversations. And where are our opportunities? And there are lots of opportunities out there. There are lots and lots of adult learners who need to engage, who either have some credit, no degree, or who have never been in higher education. And maybe they're not going to get a bachelor's degree, but maybe there's a shorter term credential that will help them find the next sort of thing in their lives that could, at the same time as giving them a leg up in their sort of workforce lives, could help them establish a stronger connection with the university, which then has a ripple effect in the public narrative, in the local community, in their children. We have to start thinking long-term and strategic and get out of this short-term, got to make budget this year thinking. And that's easier said than done. You know, having been an enrollment manager, I know that that's easier said than done. But that's where we are right now. And I think institutions who are going to come out of this current environment stronger are people who are going to think much more holistically and strategically about enrollment writ large and stop focusing just on their freshman class.
Such a good point.
Yeah, Melanie, did you think that I'm not going to call it a trend because I think it's premature to call it that, but the kind of increasing number of institutions that are opting out of the rankings and the
Outrageous.
I know, isn't it?
Who would ever thought?
Mind-boggling that it could actually happen. You could break that hold on that. Do you think that is kind of green shoots on kind of more strategic thinking about enrollment management? Because the data that goes into those rankings is it's short-term stuff.
I would agree. I hope that this is a leading indicator of a trend. One like you can certainly interpret it that way. I hope that is actually the case. Not sure. I think it's too soon to know because there aren't enough. But I think that rankings is certainly one of those challenges that like puts us into that place of short-term thinking that is not healthy. And it fuels this like frenzy to get into the top 100 institutions and forgets that there are 3,700 other institutions that are accredited and quality and graduate learners every day who can get jobs.
It's fuzzy math.
Yeah. And so I think the rankings definitely fuels that. And I'm hopeful, but
you never know.
We'll see.
By the way, I interviewed Bob Morse, the chief data strategist at U.S. News World and Report. It was a very confusing interview, to say the least, because in his mind, you have to know, like, however those rankings took place. And when you actually try to speak him, it didn't come out. I don't think he was able to really explain. And that was a really good indicator that I think there's a lot that goes into that that's not clear. And I think people know that if they follow them. Higher ed continues to change. And Melanie, although I'd like to keep you for another hour and debate the whole admission sales thing with you, because I think that would be a fascinating conversation.
Totally would.
For another day. Now you're getting an invite to come back already. We've got two final questions as we wrap up this episode to be sensitive to everybody's time. What else do you want to say about ACCRAO? Anything else coming up, going on, open mic moment for you to take a minute or two and talk about your organization?
Oh, wow. That's great. I will say that we are an organization that is doing a lot right now. We are really excited about a bunch of new initiatives. And I will say rethinking around old initiatives. We're not necessarily changing the focus of what we do, but we are reframing that. We are an organization that is working much harder to be a little bit more bold and help our members kind of get out of their day-to-day work. They're so overwhelmed coming out of the pandemic and thinking about, I've got to get this done. I've got to get the class. We need them to lift their heads and see what's on the horizon and start thinking big and strategic, and to see how all of the work that ACCRAO members do is connected.
Oh, yeah.
So we're really excited about all of that work. We've got a new conference that is in partnership with ACCRAO that Nicole is going to join us. That's Convergence.
Nicole,
that's going to be
again.
Yeah,
see her again.
We're going to see her. I can't wait. It's going to be great.
Surprise.
And then we've got our traditional things as well. But I would say people ought to watch what we're doing because we've got a lot of big things in the works in the learning mobility space, and there's a lot more to come.
Last question for you today. What do you see for the future of higher education? Best for last.
Yeah. So I am envisioning a bright future because I know that the people who work in higher ed are really, truly dedicated to changing lives and helping learners realize the economic and social mobility that education promises. They've seen it evidenced in the learners that they've worked with, and they are believers. And so I do think that we are going to come out of this, and I think that we are going to come out of this stronger, more connected to the needs of learners. And that's really exciting to me. I do think we may see some consolidation. Yeah. And I don't think that's going to go away. I think that's going to continue. But I think that we're going to come out of it stronger and with a better articulated return on investment for learners, and hopefully a better public image than higher ed has right now.
100%.
Well, I will tell you that was a fascinating conversation. My guest co-host and guests were surprised every time I hit a sound effects. I get them to shock off the screen, which is always fun for me because I can vary up what I do. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest co-host today, I would say she asked incredible questions. In fact, they're far better than mine. Ladies and gentlemen, here she is, Nicole Engelbert. She's VP of Higher Education Product Strategy at Oracle. Nicole, what do you think of your first co-hosting gig here at EdUp?
I think I still have a lot to learn from you, Joe, but when you have a great, smart, visionary thinker who's also really just really nice, like Melanie, it's a lot easier to do it. So thank you so much for inviting me. And Melanie, thank you for tolerating and answering my questions so graciously and insightfully. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank
you for tolerating Nicole's questions, Melanie. She said it.
I will say this was a really fun conversation. I love talking about higher ed. It's, it's my jam, and it's great to talk about it with equally knowledgeable and passionate folks. So thanks for having me.
Ooh, ladies and gentlemen, my guest today. No, she is your guest today. Melanie Gottlieb. She's the executive director at Acro. See, I could say it easier the second time. And she is an amazing leader, leading an amazing organization. We thank you for your work that you're doing, Melanie, to elevate the work of registrars, admissions officers across the country, because they need the attention that they get. It is hard work that they do. Thank you for coming on the podcast. We hope you had a good time.
Absolutely.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've just EdUp'd.
Oh, yeah.
Attention higher ed marketing and enrollment management professionals. We are taking the EdUp Experience podcast to Insights EDU. Join us at Insights EDU on February 20th to 22nd, 2024 in Phoenix, Arizona. Gain insight into the latest higher education trends and cutting-edge marketing strategies that'll take your institution's enrollment to a whole new level. This is your opportunity to connect with higher education leaders and marketing experts from across the country. Comprehensive presentations, engaging panel discussions, and more. Insights EDU will equip you to position your institution for growth. Register now at insightsedu.com and use the code EdUp to save $50 off your registration. Can you afford to miss this conference?
I don't think so. Attention.
Forbes called commencement the beginning of a new era in higher education, a dispensable touch point for what's being said in, about, and around higher education now. Don't miss the insights from 125 college and university presidents about what the future of higher education holds. Pick up your copy of Commencement on Amazon today.